Hello, this is our first session of um, the people and public space and people workshop in the Dream Hammer experience. We are connecting here and about to start. So, are you all around? Would like to have some feedback in the chat to know a bit who is around, and if we can start as soon as possible. Okay, hola Agatha. Okay, this is shaky. Can you see me?
There is a problem with that.
Okay, yeah, I'm just wanted to check. I was writing something in the chat. I wanted to check whether I was because I could see my image, but it was very shaky. So it looked like if I have eaten some sort of chemical substance, which is not the case because I'm a very professional person and I'm working, so I wouldn't do that. Yeah, today's we're about to. Do we have the PowerPoint?
Yes.
It's here. Okay. Okay. Let me just open the. The PowerPoint presentation I have for you.
I'm afraid that you can't use both, mixed image.
No, why? Why? Okay. Okay, so we will. Can they see the PowerPoint now?
If you should like that.
Okay. Okay, so how can I have the whole screen here? Okay, so well, today's lecture or workshop session is going to be an introduction to the 4 sessions we're going to have. Remember, we have already had one. We had a session a few weeks ago, which was kind of an introduction, or rather to get contact with the participants, to introduce the topics and talk a bit about what was the main variables, the main elements we were going to deal with, or we're going to talk about and work with in these sessions. And we had some nice feedback from different participants. So we had included it in this series of presentations that I'm going to go through very quickly. Okay, so well, just a little remark on the picture I choose because I think it's a very interesting way of a very interesting expression of a public space turned into a place by people. It's just a wall in between blocks in a 1960s, 70s neighborhood in a working class area in Barcelona. So most of the residents are aged people that immigrated in those days from the countryside, Spanish, and they love to display their canaries and other, I think they're canaries, most of them, and other singing birds in little nails in the walls, and they just sit there. They put the cages into these clothing bags of very funny textures and colors made by the wives. And so it's very funny to see these old workers, some of them really, blue collar, hardcore workers, factory workers, shipyard workers, port workers, carrying their little bag with the little cage with the canary, and they're sitting there for hours talking about football, about canaries, about other things. So I think it's a good example. From nothing, from just a plain wall, you have a place in which people meet, gather, compete with their canaries, and I think it's something I've seen this in several places in Spain. So without being something very, very typical, I think it's something that happens in these kind of environments. So just very briefly, I would like to give a short sort of introduction to the to different issues we're going to look at in these and other sessions. So today we're going to look a bit at the daily experience in public spaces. What is it about? What is it? Some reflections, some theoretical ideas. Then also the socio-spatial aspects of public space in the central city, and we understand that Hamar, because of course we're going to provide references to the city of Hamar and to the Stortugan Place Square. So we will look at social spatial aspects of public space in the central city. We'll look in the next session to functions and uses of public space, and we will discuss some things about that. Then we will have a look to the policy process, the decision-making process of public spaces in this case, in our case, in city centers. How public place is decided upon, what are the actors that take place in it, etc. So we might compare a couple of cases, and we might talk about public space. What we are going to talk about public space in the key of governance and public policy, which I guess for designers and urban planners and especially architects might be something interesting, because I guess it's a fairly new world or new point of view to focus on public space from the side of policy. So we will talk about the case of Hamar, and we might include other cases to compare. And then we would in another session we would have a look to the process in which public space is turned into social place, and we will deal with some interesting examples too about things that are taking place in different parts of the world in terms of more informal public spaces. When I say informal, I'm referring to public spaces that were not public spaces originally. They were just plots, non-places, or neglected places, etc., which are being appropriated, occupied, transformed by the residents into a place to be, and a place to interact, and a place to like. And we have both bottom-up, top-down experiences in this sense, which I think is very stimulating for us to work, to think about. So we start with with daily experience in public places. So I think it would be interesting to think about two very basic notions, concept, which is place and non-place. It is interesting to think that places and non-places are generally confused both by authorities and also by people somehow. We tend to think that a lot of what Marc Auger, the French anthropologist, defines as non-places, and something which I conceptualization that I feel comfortable with. What Marc Auger defines as non-places are often considered as places, and they are taken presented as places. Okay, so now we would see a bit what is what, and what can we think about in terms of place and non-place. So basically, for Marc Auger, a place is somewhere where identity, social relations, and history can be read, and a non-place is somewhere where this reading is not possible. Okay, so I think he puts a lot of emphasis in the notion of records, of identity, of symbolism, and all the potentials and the power that is behind these these concepts in relation, in the relation between a person and a space. So this capacity of evoking, this capacity of stimulating, of provoking original, intense feelings, thoughts, relations, etc. It's a feature of a place, and a known place is somewhere where this reading is not so possible. Of course, these are dichotomies that they're defined in terms of ideal types, so to speak. So obviously there are places which have some features of known places, and there are known places which might have some features of places, because some of the interactions that might take place there could have some potential reading in the direction I have mentioned before. But still, I think the concept is clear, and especially is very useful to analyze what we have around our lives in terms of public spaces, and to sort of evaluate whether they're really public spaces or they're just known places or just space, open space. Okay, so I just included a couple of pictures of the Vigeland Park in Oslo.
No, okay. Maybe you can sometimes switch between the camera.
Okay.
So they can see you. I don't know.
Yeah, perfect. Sorry, today for some reason I don't know, software is not running properly, so I cannot mix both images of me and PowerPoint, which is probably the most entertaining thing. So yeah, it's very shaky. I'm sober, so it's just a technical thing. So I included these two images in which of a park and Vigeland Park and an anonymous park somewhere with kids around, just teenagers playing. And I think it is important, and I want to link this with the post that Eva Alvarez from Valencia, one of our participants, had published in our blog row, in which she mentions the problems, or she mentions the problem of public space and young people. Where do young people go? What do they do? Do they have public spaces, places to be used without being bombed literally by consumption, by publicity, etc. They are very, very vulnerable and interesting and juicy target for the company. So it's hard to conceive, and I think this is changing a bit, but it's hard to conceive public spaces for teenagers. Or not conceive them, we're conceiving them, but to find them. Most of the parks we have in a lot of countries are thought for kids or pre-teenager, pre-adolescent population, but not so much for teenagers, because they're supposed not to be interested in playing anymore, which is something which is very far from right. Most of the consumption teenagers have, it's about playing, and playgrounds for teenagers hardly exist. So this is just something I want to add to our common debate, because I think it's relevant for the future. So what would be known places? Known places would be Sally? Okay, known places would be spaces of circulation, like highways, airports, trains, bus stations. There would be consumption spaces, like malls, hotels and restaurants, chains, parkings, inert spaces like interstitial and liminal, such as empty plot spaces. Such as empty plot spaces between infrastructures, etc. I think this is a quite interesting conceptualization of these elements of the urban landscape, which also not only appear in the urban landscape, but more and more in the rural landscape too. So, as I was saying sometime before in the introduction, rurality is more and more stained by urbanity. So urban, rural environments are developing, are having in them, are seeing how urban spaces grow inside themselves, and some of these, what I call urban spaces in the rural environments, in the rural realms, are precisely these malls, these hotels, restaurant chains, and elements that are easily recognizable, easily identifiable with a kind of urban consumption culture. So I just add some pictures here, which I think might be interesting, about some of these known places, which are, you know, lounges, these funny non-man lands in the surroundings of malls or of you know, commercial areas, which are often they're used as shortcuts or as places with a very specific functionality by people, but not actually given a dimension of place. They're non-place, non-lieu role is increased actually with these uses that are given. Some others are not given any use, and then we have these paradoxical situations in the cities, in new developments, and very common in Spain, in which you might have these huge urban developments uncompleted and in a state of bankruptcy because of the explosion of the bubble, of the real estate bubble. So you have these avenues of 4 lanes which are just you know, cut by rubble and debris. Those are definitely hardcore known places. So some previous thought about public spaces that I might have mentioned already some of them, but not all of them, and I think it's interesting to put them together, would be the functions, mentioning some of the functions of public spaces, although we're going to develop a session about these very much with a lot of emphasis on this idea. But some of the functions of public places are socialization, social interaction, leisure and recreation, and to some extent this makes sense when we talk about non-places. Some of these non-places, like specifically malls, do concentrate these functions too, but as we were saying in our first definition, is in those places identity, social relation and history are not so easily readable. Although I have some, you know, I would propose a complementary redefinition, or not a complementary, a redefinition of the concept of a non-place, because when we talk about social interaction, history, we should think that for more and more people, those non-places are becoming strong identitarian, territorial references. And in some countries like the United States, this goes back to maybe 3 generations. So it starts to have some sort of historical dimension of identity, dimension of identification with a certain, some of these known places, with the territory, with the urban habitat of residents. So we should be careful with that. Although I share the definition, but I think it is a dynamic definition that should be reconceptualized and thought about in each different case. So we shouldn't, in the mid-run, we shouldn't classify non-places as something so standard as that. Also because they are also processes, social processes, in which some of these non-places are turned into public spaces in a very substantive way. So we should think in non-places as something rather dynamic than static. public spaces are also spaces of multidimensional realities. They have a social dimension, cultural, urban, architectural, environmental, technological, and I didn't add something which is two more, which is it is also a political reality. It has this political dimension, and with it, of course, the policy dimension. Okay, so we should think as public spaces as those places in which a lot of professional, technical, personal, emotional looks converge, and those looks, those glances of people working, feeling, using, suffering, enjoying public spaces are coming from completely different intellectual, professional, sensorial, and personal backgrounds. All this is obviously obvious, but I think it's important to put it together and to become very aware of it now that we're going to work together in this project of the Hamar Square, in which obviously these variables, these multidimensional realities, are as present as in any other public space in the world. Also, another reflection about, another thought about public places. This is more from a detached perspective, which is to what extent the state of public spaces gives us information about the dynamics of the population that use them, the conflict and potentials that they might contain, these public spaces. I would also add they can depict political will, how the city is considered or understood by authorities, political authorities or technical authorities. I think this is very important. There's this whole theorization more in the key of security than in the key of just public space, sociology of public spaces, which is this idea that if there's a broken window, theory of the broken window, if there's a vandalized from the broken window or vandalized, say, lamplight in a park, the sooner it is repaired, the more safe the place feels, and the more protected the people using that place would feel, despite there is some sort of violence and aggression against the urban furniture. This idea of the states of public space not only goes through the maintenance of the space and how quickly they are repaired, but also about the general feeling that public spaces can give. You might have a beautiful public space, really looked about, and very expensive furniture and things might not be used because it's not appropriated, it's not tempting, it's not attractive for users, and they might gather in a little square with hardly any furniture, but which is maybe under the shadow, or there's a nice breeze running, or it's just simply a place where it has always happened, where people have always met. So it's important to know a bit what's to read or to evaluate the state of public spaces, and how can this give us information about it and about other variables. The same about design and management. It has a very important impact not only on the conflicts that might take place, the symptoms of the real causes. Again, the security variable is very present when it's talk about public spaces. It is very present to the extent that some countries and some cities, especially in Europe, and I guess the States too, have been literally planted with CCTV systems, in which even there was the case of the Great Britain is very interesting, because there was a whole program to incentivize the installation of CCTV in the streets, closed circuit television cameras, namely, So the whole city centers were completely monitorized and could be tracked and watched from a single place. This kind of almost virtual panopticon. But it's not just about these. It's not about just how conflict is prevented, but also how the design and management of public spaces can contribute to prevent conflict, sorry, I'm just changing now. You see again my distorted head. So public design and management. Sorry, I lost myself. The design influences very much on the way people interact with this public space, and to some extent, I was thinking about this the other day. To some extent, the design, the elements that a public space would have, and I'm thinking about playgrounds for children and for teenagers, would surely definitely influence in some aspects of the socialization of those kids. I was visiting. I'm working in Berlin this year, so I go very often. And I was visiting the Volkspark in Prenzlauersburg, in the former east of Berlin, which is a very nice park from the 19th century. And it has a wide range of playgrounds in which most of them, or all of them, are made of tree trunks of wood, which is processed to be waterproof and stuff like that, but it's not standardized wood. You might find twisted branches, you might find some solid logs, tree trunks, but each playground is completely different, and each playground is arranged around stories, arranged around a topic. It might be like a sort of fort in a little tiny hill. It might be a pirate boat. It might be just a little house or a set of houses, little huts made of boards. Everything is very solid. Everything is but it's extremely creative. And I could see the designers really enjoying what they were doing, and I could see kids experiencing and learning about their playground by playing. Playing is one of the most substantive learning processes we have in life. I could see those kids learning in a different way as the kids of a city in which all the playgrounds look exactly the same, or even a country in which all the playgrounds look exactly the same with maybe 2 or 3 variations. Playgrounds, and this is the case of Spain, by the way, and Madrid, are made generally by the same companies with same elements because they have the same rules of homologation. So generally, probably that's my impression, and that's what I'm researching currently, reading some literature on psychology and public spaces. Probably the socialization process, the learning process of kids, which have this variety of playgrounds, which are telling them, look, you can play with anything, you can make out of anything, of irregular woods, of stones, of cobbles, you can make playground, solid, safe playground. That information probably influences in a different way in the learning process of the kids, as that other kid that knows that he's going to find exactly the same park, same playground in every single place in the country, with the same colors, the same textures, the same degrees of erosion, etc., etc. Okay, so I think this is an important variable in relation to public spaces. Not only about playgrounds. This is just a reflection I mentioned because it's something I'm thinking about lately. Finally, a healthy public space, which is used, which is valued, which is dynamic, which is perceived as safe. It's also sorry for the have a sustainable. Can I change both? A sustainable public space. Yeah, I'm here. Okay, fine. So. No. Sorry, we have this little thing. Can you sit here so I can see you? Te puedes sentar aquí que se te ve lo que hay. So we have this idea also of a sustainable public space, which I think is very relevant to take in account. And of course now everything is sustainable. Everything turns to be sustainable, even cars and things like that, or aeroplanes. But we have to think. I think despite it's a bit devaluated concept, I think it's important to use it in the right appropriate environments, and definitely a public space is an environment. It's an adequate environment to use the notion of a sustainable public space. This sustainability, I insist, is due to the mere features of the public space, use, how it is perceived by people, and also, of course, how it is managed by the authorities. That's something we would see in further sessions. So, what are the social spatial aspects of public space in the central city? I'm focusing this. I'm providing this kind of double approach in public space, or double spatial approach on public space, because it's not only talking about space, obviously, but I want to center and to situate this space, this public space, in a specific part of the city, in the central city. This is, of course, the case for Hamar, for the Stortugan Square, which is it's literally in the middle of the city. It is the middle of the city, a city which, as you know, and I make some references now I'm referring now to the booklet, to the whole project that we're working with in Ecosistema Urbano and for the city of Hamar. Those who are just maybe not familiar with the process, in which we are, through this particular workshop and through other participative on-site process and mechanisms, we are designing the new public space, a new square of Hamar. Well, it's not new, it's a very old square, but it's going to be redesigned, and it's the aims of this project are to make of it not only a spatial center, a physical center of the city, but also a very important symbolic center, a reference for residents and inhabitants of the surroundings, etc., etc. So we should think that public space, it's embedded in the city, and it's embedded in a neighborhood, it's embedded in an area. So I think it's important to consider the different scales of the city in terms of where the public spaces are, where they lay. And then the question is raised: how are these public spaces perceived from different urban segments and scales? How are these public spaces regarded from a metropolitan area, from a city in the suburbs or in the outskirts of a big city, or from a sprawl area in the outskirts of a city? How are public spaces perceived? Both public spaces that are in those areas, which might be easily known places, or public spaces which are in the city centers or are considered proper public spaces. So I think this is interesting, and this is why we're talking about the central city, both because it's a matter of scales and of narrowing down scales, and also a matter of referring to a project we are developing in Hamar. So we have the different perception. We have to think about how the city public spaces are perceived in the metropolitan areas, in the city level or scale, in the district, and in the neighborhood. so I have this little diagram here in which I would show with this idea of the public space from the metropolitan area, from the district, from the neighborhood. Sorry, I didn't translate that part. Figuring out that public space is basically in the environment of the neighborhood, and we're talking about squares, parks, streets, other elements. But it's quite interesting to see how square like Stortogad in Hamar is perceived by the people living in the streets around, by the people living within a reasonable walking distance of maybe 20 minutes, and in the low density area around the city, that's around the city where most of the people live. The city of Hamar has over, I think, 25,000 inhabitants. But it has a very, very low density. So if you look at the maps of the city, which I actually don't have with me, you would see a city center around the square with a few streets in a grid, in a 19th century grid, which is when the city was funded. And then you would immediately see after that grid, which is not very big, a very big low density single home area. And of course, it makes a lot of sense to think in these terms for the project of Hamar, because of course most of the people that are going to be potential users of the square are living far away from the square. When I say far away, I'm saying a distance that might not be easily covered by walk, maybe by bike, certainly by car, depends on the different periods of the year. And of course it's important to think that especially for us non-Scandinavians, that public spaces in Norway, like in other Scandinavian countries, are also used in winter, well, like everywhere. But we might tend to think that winter in these countries implies basically the shutting down of most public spaces, and that people just spend 6 months, 7 months, or 8 months basically by the fire and going from work to home. There's life beyond that, and one of the most interesting and fascinating aspects of this project of Hamar is to seek how, or to think about the different uses the square might have in winter. The potentials are incredible. We're talking about tons of snow, we are talking about ice, we're talking about open activities, we're talking about doing indoor activities around the square or in the square. So there are a number of things that can be done. And of course, all these uses, all these new functions of the public space of the square of Stortogad have to be conceived not only from a neighborhood or even district perspective in a small town, but also from a city and even regional metropolitan perspective. So a lot of people would come to the square to use it, to have a look to it, to enjoy it, if the proposals we did in this project are, let's say, sexy enough and attractive enough as to move from a far distance with, I would say, unpleasant weather conditions, so forth, so on and so forth. Okay, so it is very important to take into account this perspective. How can we understand, and we are talking, this presentation is more generic than just strictly talking about Hamar, but I think living in a global environment as we live now, and this is another development of Mark Auger's work on space. He's been lately researching on the global dimensions of space. this is very important and very interesting, of course. Are these spaces perceived from the metropolitan areas, from the, say, farthest points in which users of public space or enjoyers of public space might come, or might think to come, or might have received information about the square and about the potentialities they might have. What do these people see or perceive into in their metropolitan areas in relation to public space? What are the public space references they might have? So, of course, this is arranged around European continental, I would say, cities or big cities. Maybe Hamar is a bit out of scale in this sense, but the elements, I'm sure, would be probably the same with different size and I say scale, but are probably not very, very different from these, because another feature of today's urban life and urban form is that it's terribly homogeneous, and we find everything everywhere, at least in the northern countries, in the so-called first world. So the metropolitan areas around the big cities in Europe generate new metropolitan centralities. This is the outcome of thought planning processes that said, okay, we cannot saturate the central city anymore with, and we need to create jobs, leisure, attraction in a network of new centralities that attract people for residential purposes, leisure purposes, working purposes, health, public service purposes, etc. Around these centralities, an element that has been invading gradually Europe and that has settled in the States from long ago is the mall, in which generally is used as an icon to define these centralities. So you can have this icon in terms of identical brand or building which appears everywhere and basically identifies a certain kind of use of a territory. I'm talking about, of course, the IKEAs, the Leroy Merlin, all these kind of very, very typical classic parts of the suburban landscapes of Spanish cities. But also you have these repeated identities which might not be identical, but they are repeated certainly, which is these other malls which are constructed or built in a way in which most of the elements are different and trying to be terribly original. So you have companies that are specialized in building the access to the malls, the gates, so they are as impressive as possible. Other companies would be in charge of designing the flows or the paths through which the flows of people, of clients, of potential clients have to circulate, to be exposed as much as possible to shops, to products, to consumers, temptation, so to speak. So at the end of the day, these places are fairly repeated, fairly identical, fairly common, fairly similar, and the reference of urban identity are often contained in the central city. I think I have this anecdote. I lived some 4 or 5 years ago, which I was making a report on public spaces for the city of Madrid, and we were shooting some little film in a square. So we spent almost a day and a half in the same square, seeing what was going on, which was in the city center, in the old quarters of the city. What kind of uses, what kind of users, how they change. I mean, all these kind of things. And at some point, this group of very young teenagers, 13, 14, 15 years old, 4 or 5 were together. They were very well dressed, so they were middle upper class. They were drinking tons of alcohol at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, which in Spain is the hour where you start going out. It's very, very early. We eat at 3, so at 5 you start going out. Even if you're a teenager and you have to be 10 at home. So these kids were there, and they would telling us that they were staying in that square, which was not the kind of square in which middle upper class kids would be expected to be seen, because they were like, you know, some kids playing rap, smoking joints, some homeless drinking beer. So there would be some sort of groups that might generate a feeling of lack of security or something like that for these very specific middle upper class groups. Of course, there was like 5 cars of police in the square, so that's probably makes for a long time, for months, so it makes it much more safer. And these kids were saying, look, we come from these suburbs in the north or in the east. They probably have very nice homes with gardens and swimming pools, which is very unusual for Spanish standards. And the reading I made of that is that they really wanted to consume. Actually, we agree on that when we talk about that with the kids. They wanted to consume the city. They wanted to enjoy the city. They wanted to discover the city and to feel all these adventures that you might have in the city center, and just staying for a while in a public space with a lot of life, with a lot of activity, with a lot of different people doing different things. So it is the unexpected, the recently unexpected events and experiences that you might accumulate in an afternoon in a square, in a public space, in a sustainable, good public space, in a place, so to speak, that make these kids coming from an hour and a half commuting to the city center for just 2 or 3 hours, because the reference of urban identity were obtained in the central city for them. And this is something which I think is applicable to most cities in the world. So another aspect of these perceptions of the city, we're going from the metropolitan scale to the city scale on public spaces. So it is definitely different for people that are living in a city, in the same city, the relation, the perception they might have with a given public space. And of course, we're thinking about iconic public spaces, which is the ones that at city level and at a metropolitan level, we're thinking about big squares, parks that everybody knows in the city and they're important for a city. Y no me estoy dando ninguna bola con esto, tío. I need to see this now.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going just in a minute to just have a look to the chat, which seems to be boiling. So I'll just pay attention to that in a minute or two. So from a city perspective, there's a symbolic relevance for the metropolitan area residents, as I mentioned before. It is the image of the city. It is the status of urban life, as I was mentioning with this little anecdote of the teenagers. It is the icon of the city part, and it is of the urban life, and it's also this perception, which is, you know, it's denostated and it's rejected by a lot of people, but also unconsciously valued by also a lot of people, which is this notion of a theme park. The city centers has become a theme park of itself. This is something we perceive and we say about a lot of city centers and of course this might be horrible and and something which we profoundly dislike if we live nearby or if we live in that city and we've seen it change and turn into a theme park with franchises, same sort of commerces, global consumption and opportunities, etc. But it's very tempting for those people living in the outskirts, in the metropolitan areas, in which a lot of the urban environment they feel they have and what they interact with is terribly homogeneous and terribly standardized. So the fact of a park, of thematization of city centers is also attractive, not only for the people that want to look for new experiences, but also for the people that want to look at exactly the same but with another shape. In the city centers, there are, of course, concentration of cultural, administrative, and leisure resources, and public spaces recover or have a landscape and identity relevance, both for residents and for foreigners. And we're talking about foreigners as tourists, are also visitors from metropolitan areas or other parts of the same country. that they go to the city center to consume, and they gather around and they use the public spaces. So finally, we have that it is at the district and neighborhood level where the public space covers or recovers dimension of place, both in streets, squares, parks, etc. And this is obviously a much more closer and intimate relation with the public space and with its perception as a place. This is the place where you go every day, or you pass through every day, or where you buy something every day, or meet someone every day, or you see the same people every day. And this feeling of place is exactly what I was mentioning before, with people that might travel a long time or commute a long time to experience these kind of situations that are daily and routinary at the neighborhood or district level, and that they not reproduce in other urban environments which are more unfriendly, or whose urban public spaces are more unsustainable because they're not really used, or they're surrounded by known places in the daily life activity. So let me before finishing, let me have a look to the chat, which is really boiling here. Okay, so Susana has engaged into a debate, with Agatha, and Susana Isabel is saying the use of non-standardized elements for playgrounds is mainly fought by the public administrations because the maintenance becomes more difficult and therefore more expensive. And Agatha says, okay, how we can avoid the habit of taking the furniture from a catalog without analyzing the concrete place. And definitely, it is both things. I agree with Agatha, but I also agree with Susana. It is cheaper to do it in a standardized way. It is cheaper. It's easier rather than cheaper, because I don't think playgrounds are extremely cheap. They're solid and well built, and it is about more developing styles of city styles or public space styles, public space cultures, in which if you develop, like in Germany, we have in a very, very clear way, if you develop a culture of diverse, different playgrounds in which standardization is not appropriated and is not well regarded, you would have an industry that would compete and that would make non-standard playground, urban furniture in general, at competitive prices. It is certainly a strategy to develop not only wonderful, stimulating, sustainable public spaces, but also local development. As an anecdote, I think it's quite absurd that we have in Madrid, we have just a new huge public space which is along the river. It's called Madrid River, and it's super nicely designed. It's landscape stuff, very nice public space, even a bit too much maybe. It's like everything is done already, you just have to enjoy. And most of the furniture, and certainly the playgrounds, which are for kids, for teenagers, and for aged people, for elders, most of these playgrounds are equipped with German playground furniture, which is absurdly expensive to import it here, but probably nobody has thought in doing it here. And this is presented as the most avant-garde, modern option for public grounds. So, we don't make them, but we import them when we want to flash and to call other people's attention. So think about that. Well, the hours of using spaces. Yeah, the hours of using spaces is also interesting for me. Spain is really late, says Agatha, which is a Polish colleague, which is apparently living in Vigo, in Galicia, northeast of Spain. Beautiful but wet, almost all the year. All my life I've been living in Poland, in Gdansk, that's north, and there are different uses of space. That's very right. I think it's very interesting how public spaces are used. We're going to see that next session. So I just advance you some things. It was in this video we shot for the municipality was very interesting because in the same square, which is not a very big square, maybe 50 or 70 meters per side square. I mean a square. It's called Dos de Mayo in Madrid, in the city center. Very beautiful place. I think I might have somewhere a picture. I show it to you next time. And this square was intensely used for maybe I would say 18 hours a day. So from the early morning you would have aged people with the dogs, maybe some people with the kids, people having a coffee in a couple of terraces at some bars around half. Then you start seeing different groups, the homeless, the local drug addicts, which live there because they have a house, they own a house, but they are in their 50s and they are really run down, but completely part of the landscape. You would have a group of university students that have decided not to go to class and are just hanging around there, and so on and so forth. So along the day you would have different groups making different use of the space, and you would see at 10 o'clock night, late night, already a dark night, you would still see the kids swinging around because it was spring, so it was very good weather, swinging around with the swings, with the slides, using the playgrounds, kids from all ages with the parents just hanging around too, chatting, maybe having a beer in the terrace attached to the playground, which is a wonderful idea actually. So it's really interesting, and we would see that how different uses change with time, with the season, of course. And this is, as what I was saying before, is very substantial to the case of Hamad, because definitely the change conditions, the seasonal conditions are making the space change. But I insist, very interesting, very important to think how people enjoy public spaces in winter in Scandinavia. In the south of Europe, we associate winter to cold, sometimes rain, but certainly not something to be out. In the case of Norway and in other Scandinavian countries, winter is very, very welcome. When you ask people there, they will tell you, well, the worst season for us is fall because it's rainy and everything is muddy and wet and there's no light because the days start getting very short. But in winter, the days are even shorter, but you have snow, and snow gives light. So winter is perceived as a time to be outdoor, and a lot of sports is done outdoor, a lot of activities, and definitely a public space has a completely new life in winter in a place like Hamar. So there you go. I again encourage you to keep on thinking in the project with these brief notions of public space, some thoughts, some just territorial, spatial approach in terms of scales of public space, in terms of the population that might look at a given public space, in our case Hamar, and in the hope that you find this stimulating and contribute with a lot of ideas and brilliant proposals to our project. So thank you very much, and see you on Tuesday at 6 with our workshop session, and of course on Wednesday again at 6 too. Okay, thank you, bye bye.